And I call the member for McManus.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A few weeks ago, the member for Wentworth casually sauntered out into one of the courtyards here in Parliament House and he announced to the Australian people that he would be cutting down a first-term Prime Minister. And what was the reason he gave to the Australian people for this move? Well, he told us that Australia wasn't receiving the economic leadership we need, and hence he needed to replace the Prime Minister. Quite extraordinary. A putative Prime Minister saying that the cabinet, the government he'd been a senior minister in for 2 years, was letting Australia down when it came to the economy. Now, the Labor Party has been pointing this out for 2 years. We've been making that argument. Malcolm Turnbull, the now Prime Minister, made the argument, and the majority of the Liberal Party agreed with him. They'd come around to that point of view that they weren't giving Australia the leadership they needed. Well, what was the Prime Minister's answer to this question? His secret weapon on the economy. Turned out it was the member for Cook, his new Treasurer. This was his appointment to turn around the malaise in economic policy making in Australia. Well, we finished today the first full sitting fortnight of the Turnbull government with the new Treasurer, and we see a performance over the fortnight that makes the old Treasurer look good. Who would have thought the member for Cook could make the member for North Sydney look on top of his brief, Mr Speaker? Who would have thought that he could make the member for North Sydney look like a paragon of competence in his first outing as Treasurer in the House? But he managed it. He managed to do it. So it's been quite clear through this fortnight that if the member for Cook is the answer, the Prime Minister's asked the wrong questions about the economy. Firstly, let's look at the new Treasurer's performance when it comes to the budget. Now, the whole raison d'etre of the Abbott-Turnbull government is to fix the budget. They told us they'd get back to surplus, and that was the whole reason for their being elected. And one of the new Treasurer's first moves, he was right out of the blocks. His first moves as the new Treasurer was to say Australia does not have a revenue problem, he told us. Only a spending problem, he said. Well, we've heard that before, because the member for North Sydney used to say that. The member for North Sydney used to say that standing here, and used to say it standing on the other side as well, that Australia didn't have a revenue problem. But then he came to office and he brought down a budget, and he brought in a GP tax, and a petrol tax and a deficit levy, all revenue measures, Mr Deputy Speaker. And then yesterday the former Treasurer gave his valedictory speech and he begged for high-income superannuation concessions to be reined in. He even called for the reform of negative gearing. They'd be revenue measures, Mr Deputy Speaker. The former Treasurer worked out what the new Treasurer has yet to work out. And at question time, we've asked the Treasurer, how much did revenue fall between 2014 and 15 budgets? We asked the new Treasurer. Well, the answer could qualify as simply bizarre, because he came to the dispatch box to tell us about spending. That was his answer to a question about revenue. Now, I will concede this. Spending under this Treasurer is running at GFC levels. That is true. That is true. We concede that. We agree with that. But then the new Treasurer tells us we should reduce spending to the same proportion it was in 2007 under the Howard government, which was 23.1% of GDP. So from 25.9, which is high, to 23.1. Now that amounts to $45 billion a year in cuts that he says that the nation needs to embrace. Now let's consider just how big that would be. Well, the age pension in the budget is $44 billion, and he wants $45 billion worth of cuts. So he could abolish the age pension. That would be one way of doing it, and with this government you wouldn't put it past them. But they've already had a go at the pension on several occasions. But that just shows the magnitude of this Treasurer being completely out of his depth. No wonder he's confused about when they're going to get back to surplus, Mr Deputy Speaker. Again, we asked him when Australia will get back to surplus. It's quite clear he thought it was a trick question. He wasn't happy to be answering that question because he couldn't answer. Now, we forgive him that. We all have question times where you maybe have some question times better than others. But he was asked again on the Today Show the next day, so he'd had 24 hours to think about this, Mr Deputy Speaker. And in an interview which I think would be an equal tie with the Minister for Social Services for the biggest train wreck of the week. He tells us that we'll get back to surplus, and I quote, "in the future when we get to that point." Was his very detailed and specific. And not in the past, he cleared that up. He cleared that up. We will not get to surplus in the past, we will get to surplus in the future. So this is the new position of the Abbott-Turnbull government. We had several. We were told it was going to be surplus in the first year. Well, that's been and gone. And every year afterwards, then we were told at the end of the forward estimates, in 4 years' time, that's no longer the case. Then we were told at the end of the decade, and then the former Treasurer, the member for North Sydney, said it didn't really matter when we got back to surplus. And now the new Treasurer says, well, it does matter and we'll get there in the future at some point. So that's the fiscal strategy of the government. And then we've got, of course, the Treasurer all talk when it comes to economic growth. He tells us, well, you should be focused on economic growth, like we are. I wonder if you were Treasurer in the Abbott-Turnbull government whether you'd be talking about growth, whether you'd be talking about economic growth. I don't think you'd be boasting about the performance. Again, we asked the Treasurer, was growth for this financial year revised up or down in the Abbott-Turnbull government's last budget? Well, we didn't get an answer to that. He could have tabled a document. He could have tabled a graph of growth under the Liberal government, Mr Deputy Speaker. He could have tabled this graph showing growth going down under this government. He chose not to do that. There's no adrenaline rush, and we'll get to confidence in a minute, the member for Fraser. But he could have tabled that, but no, he didn't. And is it any wonder that growth is down when confidence has been so down on this government's watch? Business and consumer confidence down. Westpac consumer sentiment shows consumer confidence remains down even after the recent change of management, the coup, where the first-term Prime Minister was cut down by the member for Wentworth, remains down 12% on the election. The index has been under 100 for 18 out of the last 20 readings, which means it's in negative territory. Confidence remains down, and confidence remains down because of the lack of confidence in the economic management of this government. The backbench showed a lack of confidence in the economic management of the Abbott-Hockey government, and the nation has a lack of confidence in the economic management of this new Treasurer. And we are continuing to see that play out day after day. We've had 2 years of failed leadership, 2 wasted years under this Liberal National Party government. We were promised an adrenaline charge to confidence, and all we've had is 2 wasted years. 2 years of arrogance, 2 years of false starts, 2 years of missed opportunities, 2 years of prejudice and cuts, Mr Deputy Speaker, exactly the opposite of what the Australian people were promised. So bad has been that performance over 2 years that this government cut down their Prime Minister because they were told that economic management wasn't up to scratch. That was the campaign picture of the member for Wentworth. The economic management has not been up to scratch, and he said he had a new plan to fix it, and that new plan was the member for Cook. Well, the new plan isn't working either, Mr Deputy Speaker. Plan B turns out to be as much of a shocker as Plan A. What we see is the member for Cook just clearly not up to the job. The arrogance is there. The arrogance is there, the insults are there, the lack of competence is there, but what we don't have is an economic strategy to promote growth and opportunity. What we don't have is an understanding of the pressures on the Australian people, the budgetary pressures on Australian families. And we see that play out with that sterling performance by the Minister for Social Services today. I know I'm meant to constrain my remarks to the Treasurer, Mr Deputy Speaker, but I'm sure you won't mind if we just point out for a moment that this is a cabinet-wide problem. One of the most senior ministers in the government, the Minister for Social Services, clearly not on top of his brief and arrogantly lecturing Australia's families and Australia's grandparents that they have to go back to work or they should put their 15-year-old into childcare, bizarrely, Mr Deputy Speaker. No wonder the Treasurer thought he had a good day because the Minister for Social Services finally got to his feet and finally the Treasurer looked like one of the more competent ministers in the Turnbull government. Now, in fairness, Mr Deputy Speaker, I don't hold the new Treasurer responsible for all the economic problems in this nation. The entire Liberal National Party government of the last 2 years is the one that's created these problems. But the new Treasurer needs to be on top of his brief if he's going to get on top of the incompetence of the last 2 years. The new Treasurer needs to show that he has the empathy and the understanding of the issues. The new Treasurer needs to show that he is understanding of the full details of his portfolio if he is to turn around this mess, this 2-year mess of economic management, which sees growth down, confidence down, investment down and unemployment up. and the deficit up and debt up. Can this Treasurer turn this around? Can this Treasurer fix the mess of the last 2 years? The evidence is in. The answer is no.